Now we're on Daf Mem Vavam and Beis. Amar Rabba Amar Zeiri Machlokes Sheyesh Ba Kidei Chaluka. Machlokes Shin Chacham and Rabbi Lezer is in a larger chotzer, which has at least a minimum of 8 amos, such that if we split it in half, each shutaf will receive 4 amos, which is considered a chotzer. So it's a chotzer gedola that could be split into 2 chatzeros ktanes. And here's where the Chacham hold that we cannot be matir knisa lechotza mitam brera. You can't rely on brera because there's always a possibility that in the future they'll decide to divide up the chotzer. And if after they divide up the chotzer, it turns out that one of the 2 shutfim went into the tzad, the chelik of the chotzer of his colleague, so to speak, then he violated the Isur Neder. Aval ein ba kedei chaluka, if it's a smaller chotzer, that if we divided it, it would not equal to 4 amos each. So the entire chotzer is less than 8 amos. So the chotzer is always going to remain in a situation of shutvis. Divya kol mutter. Even the chacham would agree that in such a case we could apply and rely on brera, yesh brera. And that means that when one of the 2 shutfim go into the chotzer and use that part of the chotzer, then igloy milsam afreya, that when they bought the field, that was the part of the field that he purchased, and therefore his shutfis expressed itself in bilas on that part. So he's not being nene from the madir. Amalei Rav Yosef is going to reject Rabbah and say the exact opposite. It's impossible to accept your position, Rabbah, that in a chotzer she'ein ba kidei chaluka, a smaller chotzer, the Chachamim will agree and embrace the principle of yesh brera, because what are we going to do with a Mishnah later on, a Daf Mem Ches, that addresses the case of a Beis HaKnesses, Sharei Beis HaKnesses, which is the joint communal property ownership of the Bnei Ha'ir. The Kamisha Ein Bo K'dei Chaluka Domi, there's no Chaluka with regard to a Beis HaKnesses, because everybody's considered needing the Beis HaKnesses. Utanan. And nevertheless, in the Mishnah it says, if 2 people are mudarim hano zemise, shneim asurim b'davar shel osa ha'ir. And the Mishnah means that included in the davar shel osa ha'ir is the Beis HaKnesses, and each of them are asurim in the Beis HaKnesses. So we see clearly that according to Chacham, even a davar she'ein bo chaluka, like a Beis HaKnesses or a chotzer ketana, nevertheless, the Chacham insists that we cannot be matir. We're not going to rely on brera. Ella, Amar Rav Yosef, just the opposite. Machlokes she'ein ba kedei chaluka. The Chacham and Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov are arguing in our Mishnah, a chotzer, which is a small chotzer, and if we divide it in half, each person will get less than 4 amos. And according to Chachamim, even in this case, we're not going to rely on brera to be matir, because Chacham reject brera entirely. Even in a case where there's no anticipation of the possibility that they'll divide up the chotzer. And Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov holds that even in this case, we're going to apply the principle of brera. Li'olam hachotzer tishar shel shneim. It's a chotzer shem ba shut kedei chaluka. It'll always remain the chotzer of these 2 gentlemen. And neither one of them can compel the other one to do a chalukah. So for sure, when they began their shutfis, it was aldas kol echad mehem b'shashish tamish bo chotzer kula tiyeshalo. If there's never going to be a chalukah, then the original das, when they purchased this as a partnership, must have been that each one could use the chotzer. And at the time that he uses the chotzer, it's his chotzer. And that's Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. In what case, says Rav Yosef, would Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov agree? Would he concede? If it's a larger field, that if we split it, each person, each shutuf will receive 4 amos. and therefore each one could force the other shutuf to do a chalukah, is even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We're not going to say that from the get-go, when they purchased the field b'shutvis, it was aldas shekol echad mehem yishtamesh b'chatzah shalo, because there's always a possibility that one will compel the other to do a chalukah, and therefore l'divrei hakol also, even l'das Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's going to be also. So let's just go over the logic of the last argument of the Gemara. Even Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will have to agree that we don't say that the kinyan milachatchila was aldas, that they would set up a breira that each one would be able to use and own that part of the chutzah when he deems it important to use it. But we're talking about now yesh b'kedei chalukah, which means that it's a possibility that any one of them at any time will compel his will on his colleague and force him to do a chalukah. So therefore, we cannot apply the principle of breira in that case. And therefore, even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's also Omer Rav Huna Aloch Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Omer Rabbi Eliezer Aloch Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now, we have a principle in Erev and Daf Samach Gimel, and in other places, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Mishnoso Kavenoki, which means, as Rashi interprets it, in Erev and Halacha Kemos B'chol Makom, why was it necessary here to go out of your way and paskin Halacha Kemoso when we always paskin Halacha Kemoso? But the answer is because we had the Mishnah later on in Daf Mem Ches that prohibits Mudarim Hano Zemizeh to enter into the Beis HaKnesses of the city. And that reflects the sheet of the Chachamim, because according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they would be allowed to enter into the Beis HaKnesses because ein ba kidei chalukah. So we might assume, therefore, that the Mishnah reflects that halacha here in this case, except for the rules like Rabbanan. That's why the Gemara here at the Paskin explicitly like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Mishnah says back on Daf Mem Vav and Aleph, Amudar ano mechaver v'yesh lo shom merchatz ubeis habad muskarim be'ir. And now, is it also for the Mudar ano to use this Beis HaMerchatz or Beis Habad? It all depends upon whether the maskir still has a tfisas yad. The kama, to what extent do we say that the maskir left for himself within the framework of the schirus enough to call this Beis HaMerchatz his? Kama tfisas yad Omer of Nachman, lemechzel l'shlishul reviyah. If the profits from this rental of the Beis HaMerchatz will allow the maskir to collect half, a third, or even a quarter, then it's considered that he has a tfisas yad, and therefore mudar ano be also. Aval bebatzir, we'll soon see there's another girsa here, but bebatzir, as we have a girsa, if it's less than a revia, lo, that's not considered tfisas yad of the madir, and therefore the mudar is allowed to benefit from the merchatz or the beis habad. Abai Omar afilu bibitzir, even in less than a revia, nevertheless the maskir still has a tfisas yad, the also. And the Buddha, therefore, would not be allowed to benefit from this Beis Habad or this Beis HaMerchatz. Hechi Dami Deshari. Under what situation would it be mutter for the Buddha to benefit from it? The Mekabel B'Taska, if the masker receives the rental fee as kavua each year, so he only has a bailus in the income, but he doesn't have a chelek in the merchatz itself. So again, the assumption is that if he had a chelik in the rivchei merchatz, he wouldn't have made a tanai that he would receive a certain X definitive sum on an annual basis. He would have said it depends on my chelik in the merchatz. Now the Ran has a slightly different gears of a kama. What's the shear that the maskir owns enough in the merchatz that it's thesis yad and therefore it's also mudra no? Rav Nachman lemechza l'shlishu revia. The maskir has an agreement with the socher that he will receive of the profits of the merchatz of the Beis Habad 50%, third, at least a quarter. And it's considered that he has a tfisis yad, and therefore it's also b'mudar no avol bebeitzim. Let's say the Baal HaMerchatz gives up through a rental agreement any vestige of ownership in the Beis HaMerchatz. And not only that, he doesn't even have an agreement that will give him a percentage of the rental income from the Beis HaMerchatz. But, says Rav Nachman, what does he have? It seems that it was Darkom Shabala Merchatz Mocher Beitzim Lanoshim Aboim Lirchotz Umistaker Al Yisais. The Bala Merchatz would survive financially, have a steady income by selling eggs to those who use the Beis HaMerchatz. People came to the Beis HaMerchatz, and once you're there at the sauna, bring home some groceries for your wife. Bring home some eggs. Low. That's not considered tfisis yad, because again, the maskir doesn't get anything from the guf HaMerchatz. He's only selling. He has those exclusive rights to sell whatever he sells, the beitzim. Even if the maskil left himself the schus to sell the beitzim to those who come to the merchatz, that's still considered as a tfisis yad, and it's also. And hechi domi deshari, going to buy, what would be the scenario in which the mudar no be mutter to be nana from this rented out merchatz, the makabel b'taska. If the maskir receives dmei schiras kvuim on an annual basis, that's the amount of money by agreement he gets, and he has no chelek in the income and the increment of the profits of the Beis HaMerchatz.